Life had settled into a rhythm, a dull, predictable rhythm. My wife, Elise, was a part of it, but not in the way she used to be. Somewhere along the line, our connection had thinned out like a thread about to snap. We didn't fight often, nor did we share many meaningful moments. We were just there. But that Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I wasn't even supposed to be at that cafe. My usual lunch spot was closed for renovations, and I had some time to kill before heading back to work. The small coffee shop was tucked into a quiet corner of town, the kind of place that felt untouched by time. Its weathered wooden sign swayed gently in the breeze, and the faint smell of espresso lingered in the air. I hadn't stepped inside for years, not since Elise and I first moved here. Back then, it was our little escape, a place where we'd laugh over coffee and pastries. Now it was just a distant memory. When I opened the door, the familiar sound of the bell above it jingled, and the warm hum of conversation filled the space. I was about to approach the counter when I froze. There she was, Elise, sitting at a table by the window. Her golden hair caught the sunlight, framing her face like she was in a scene from some romantic movie. But what struck me wasn't her beauty. It was the man sitting across from her. He was younger, probably in his late 20s, with a perfectly tailored suit and a confidence that radiated even from a distance. I recognized the way she smiled at him. It was the smile she used to reserve for me. My chest tightened as I watched her lean in, her hand brushing his arm as they laughed together. It wasn't just casual, it was intimate. Too intimate. My stomach churned, and my hands started to tremble. I could have stormed out right then, but something in me refused to leave. Instead, I sat at a table near the back, hidden behind a large potted plant. I told myself I needed proof, clarity, anything to make sense of what I was seeing. My heart raced as I reached for my phone, pretending to scroll while keeping my eyes locked on them. They were completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. She tilted her head, laughing at something he said, and I saw it again, that look in her eyes, the same look she'd had on our wedding day. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a betrayal, raw and undeniable. Minutes turned into an eternity. I watched as they shared a dessert, her fork playfully stealing a bite from his plate. I couldn't take it anymore. My hand clenched around my phone as I stood up, my legs moving before my brain could catch up. I didn't know what I was going to say or do, but I knew I couldn't let this go on. As I approached their table, Elise finally noticed me. Her face went pale, her smile disappearing in an instant. The man looked up, confused but unfazed, as if he had no idea who I was. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had, a receipt from lunch. With a pen I grabbed from the counter, I scribbled 3 words, "Don't come home." I placed the note on the table without a word. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening as if to protest, but no sound came out. The man shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing between us like he was trying to piece together what was happening. I didn't give either of them the chance to respond. I turned on my heel and walked out, the bell above the door jingling one last time as I left. But as I stepped outside, I didn't feel victorious. The weight in my chest only grew heavier. I stood there on the sidewalk, trying to steady my breathing, when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw Elise standing there, her face flushed with anger, or maybe guilt. She clutched the note in her hand, her knuckles white. "You're overreacting," she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the street. "It's not what it looks like." I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and for the first time I didn't recognize her. "Then what is it, Elise?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "Because it sure as hell doesn't look innocent." Her eyes darted around, as if searching for an excuse, a way to spin the situation in her favor. But before she could say anything, the man stepped out of the cafe. He looked at her, then at me, his expression unreadable. Elise turned to him, her face twisting into something I'd never seen before, fear. "Get back inside, Greg," she snapped, her tone suddenly panicked. "I'll handle this." Greg? I didn't know who this guy was, but the way she said his name sent a chill down my spine. He hesitated for a moment, then disappeared back into the cafe, leaving us alone on the sidewalk. Elise turned back to me, her expression hardening. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "But you'll regret this. Mark my words." And with that, she stormed back inside, leaving me standing there in the cold, my world unraveling one thread at a time. As I stood on the sidewalk, watching Elise disappear back into the cafe, my legs felt like they'd been rooted to the ground. Her words echoed in my mind. "You'll regret this." What the hell was that supposed to mean? My instincts told me to walk away, to leave this entire mess behind, but curiosity and anger were a dangerous mix. They chained me there, forcing me to replay the scene over and over. A part of me expected her to come rushing back out, maybe to explain or beg for forgiveness, but nothing happened. The cafe window gave me a clear view of her sitting back down with Greg. She leaned in close, speaking in hushed tones, her gestures sharp and defensive. Whatever they were talking about, it was intense, and it made my blood boil. I didn't want to make a scene, not in public, not where strangers could gawk at my humiliation. Instead, I turned and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, my mind spiraling with thoughts. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time, or had there been others? The questions came fast, one after another, and the answers felt like knives twisting in my gut. By the time I got home, I was seething. The house was eerily quiet, and for the first time it didn't feel like home. It felt like a trap, a place where lies had been spun and secrets had festered. I dropped my keys on the counter and paced the living room, my mind racing. I wanted answers, but I also didn't want to see her face. Not after what I'd just witnessed. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting me out of my thoughts. I grabbed it, hoping for some clarity, but the screen showed a text from Elise. "Elise, we need to talk. Let me explain." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. A part of me wanted to delete it, to ignore her entirely, but another part, one that still clung to some shred of hope, needed to hear what she had to say. Against my better judgment, I typed a response. "Me? Explain what? That you were on a date while I've been working my ass off to support us?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Elise, it's not what you think. Can we talk face to face?" Face to face. The idea made my stomach churn. I didn't trust myself to stay calm, but I also couldn't ignore the chance to confront her directly. I typed back a single word. "Me fine." She showed up an hour later, her face carefully composed, like she'd spent the entire drive rehearsing what to say. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her, as if trying not to disturb the delicate balance of the moment. "Elijah," she started, her voice soft but firm. "You have to let me explain." "Go ahead," I said, crossing my arms. "Explain why you were laughing with some guy like he's your new husband. Explain why you looked at him the way you used to look at me." Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But just as quickly it was replaced by something else, defensiveness. "It wasn't like that," she said. "Greg is just a friend." I laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. "A friend? Really? Do all your friends hold your hand across the table and share desserts with you?" Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "You don't understand. He's someone I can talk to, someone who listens." "And I don't listen?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I've been here, Elise. I've been here every damn day, trying to keep this marriage together while you're out playing pretend with your friend." "It's not like that," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You've been so distant lately. All you care about is work, and I don't." I interrupted, my voice cold. "Don't you dare try to make this my fault." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, she spoke, her tone low and venomous. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you? No matter what I say, you'll never believe me." I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for years, and I realized she was right. I didn't believe her. couldn't. The trust between us had been shattered, and no amount of words could piece it back together. "Get out," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Take your things and go. I don't want you here when I get back." "Elijah." "Out," I repeated, pointing toward the door. She hesitated for a moment, as if expecting me to change my mind, but when I didn't, she turned and left. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, but beneath the sadness, beneath the anger, there was something else: relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I had control over my life again. But that feeling didn't last long. Later that night, as I sat in the darkened living room, my phone buzzed again. It was a notification from my bank. Confused, I opened the app and stared at the screen in disbelief. Account balance, $0. A cold dread washed over me as I scrolled through the transactions. One by one, they appeared: large withdrawals I hadn't authorized. My hands trembled as I pieced it together. Elise hadn't just walked out. She'd taken everything. And this was only the beginning. I stared at the screen, the glowing numbers mocking me. My entire savings, everything I had worked so hard for, gone. The transactions weren't small either. Thousands of dollars had been drained from the account, all in the span of just a few hours. I felt a wave of nausea rising in my stomach as realization dawned on me. Elise had planned this. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was calculated. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of it. My mind was spinning with questions. Why would she do this? Was she always this vindictive, or had I just been blind to it all these years? My fingers hovered over my phone, unsure of who to call first, the bank or the police. I decided to call the bank, hoping to stop any further withdrawals. After waiting on hold for what felt like forever, I finally got through to a representative. "I need to report unauthorized transactions on my account," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. The representative asked for details, and I explained everything. She assured me they would investigate, but her tone didn't fill me with much hope. "We'll do our best to resolve this, Mr. Crawford. But since the transactions were made by someone with access to your account, it might be a legal matter." Access to my account. That phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. Elise had my passwords, my login details, everything. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd violated my trust in every way possible. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, and decided to call the police next. The officer who took my report was polite but skeptical. "You're saying your wife emptied your account without your consent?" he asked, his tone making it clear he'd heard similar stories before. "Were you two in the middle of a separation?" "No," I said firmly. "At least not officially. I told her to leave earlier today, but this wasn't a mutual decision. She stole from me." "We'll file a report," he said, his voice neutral. "But if her name's on the account, it might be considered a domestic issue rather than a criminal one." I thanked him through gritted teeth and hung up. A domestic issue? My entire life savings had been wiped out, and they were treating it like some petty squabble. I felt powerless, but I wasn't about to let Elise get away with this. Not without a fight. The next morning, I started digging. I went through every detail I could remember about Elise's behavior over the past few months. There had to be clues, signs I'd missed. And sure enough, the more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. The late-night phone calls she'd brushed off as work. The sudden interest in getting separate credit cards for convenience. The way she'd become distant, almost cold, but then overly sweet whenever I questioned her. It was all there, staring me in the face, and I'd been too naive or too trusting to see it. I decided to check her social media accounts. Elise had always been careful about what she posted, but her friends weren't. It didn't take long to find a photo that made my blood run cold. There she was, smiling arm in arm with Greg, standing in front of what looked like a luxury hotel. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings." The photo had been posted just hours after she walked out of our house. My jaw tightened as I stared at the screen. She wasn't just flaunting her betrayal. She was reveling in it. I clicked through the comments, hoping to find more clues. Most of them were from her friends, congratulating her and wishing her well. But one comment stood out. "Can't wait to see you guys in Cabo. Drinks on me." Cabo. So that was their plan. She'd stolen my money to fund a romantic getaway with Greg. My hands clenched into fists as anger surged through me. They thought they could just waltz off into the sunset with my hard-earned savings? Not a chance. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. I couldn't afford to act impulsively, not when they already had the upper hand. If I wanted to stop them, I needed a plan. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Miranda who didn't mince words. I explained everything, from the cafe encounter to the drained account and the Cabo trip. "She can't just take your money and run," Miranda said, her voice firm. "We'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze any remaining assets. And if she's using your funds for this trip, we'll make sure she's held accountable." Her confidence gave me a glimmer of hope, but I knew this was just the beginning. Elise wasn't the type to back down easily, and Greg, well, I didn't know much about him yet, but I had a feeling he wasn't just some innocent bystander. By the end of the day, I had a clear plan. Freeze the accounts, gather as much evidence as possible, and make sure Elise and Greg's little vacation didn't go as smoothly as they'd planned. But as I sat in the quiet of my house that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Elise wasn't just reckless. She was cunning. And if I knew her at all, she'd have a few more tricks up her sleeve. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up to the harsh reality of my situation. My savings were gone. My marriage was in ruins, and my trust in Elise, someone I had once considered my partner in life, was completely shattered. But there was no time to wallow in despair. I had to act, and I had to act fast. First, I called Miranda to follow up on the legal steps we'd discussed. She had already filed the emergency injunction to freeze any remaining joint assets. And now she was working on gathering evidence to prove Elise's intent to commit financial fraud. "Elijah," Miranda said, her voice crisp and professional, "I'll need you to document everything. Texts, emails, anything that shows her actions leading up to the account withdrawals. This will help us prove that she had malicious intent." I spent hours combing through old emails, messages, and bank statements, piecing together a timeline of Elise's betrayal. It wasn't just the recent withdrawals that hurt. It was the small, calculated steps she had taken over the past year to position herself for this moment. I found emails about opening her own savings account, a request for a larger withdrawal from our shared account to cover unexpected expenses, and even a credit card statement with charges at high-end stores I'd never heard of. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. But one email in particular caught my attention. It was from Greg. Subject: "Our future plans." I hesitated before opening it, my stomach churning with dread. The email was brief, but its contents hit me like a punch to the gut. "Elise, everything is set for Cabo. I've booked the penthouse suite, and we'll take care of the rest when we're there. By the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be long gone. Love you." There it was in black and white. Proof of their plan to rob me blind and vanish into the sunset. My hands trembled as I forwarded the email to Miranda, knowing it would strengthen our case. But even as I hit send, I couldn't shake the anger simmering just below the surface. They thought they could get away with this. They thought I'd just roll over and let it happen. Not a chance. Later that afternoon, I received a notification from the bank. One of the emergency measures Miranda had put in place had worked. They'd managed to freeze a small portion of the account before Elise could drain it completely. It wasn't much, but it was something. I felt a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. As I sat in my living room, my phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Unknown. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just let it go." My blood ran cold. The message was cryptic, but the implication was clear. It had to be from Greg. He was taunting me, trying to intimidate me into backing off. But instead of scaring me, it only fueled my determination. If they thought I'd give up without a fight, they didn't know me at all. I decided to take things a step further. Using some of the remaining funds in the account, I hired a private investigator named Darren. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the kind who could dig up dirt on anyone. I gave him all the information I had on Elise and Greg, their full names, the email about Cabo, and the details of their little celebration post on social media. "Don't worry," Darren said with a smirk. "I'll find out exactly where they're hiding, and I'll make sure they don't enjoy a second of that vacation." While Darren got to work, I decided to confront the fallout in my own life. Friends and family had started to notice that something was wrong. My sister, Clara, called me that evening, her voice filled with concern. "Elijah, what's going on? You've been acting strange lately." I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. But eventually, the words spilled out. About Elise, the cafe, the stolen money, and her getaway with Greg. By the time I finished, Clara was silent on the other end of the line. That's awful," she finally said. "I had no idea. I thought you two were happy." "So did I admitted, my voice heavy with regret. But clearly I was wrong. Clara offered her support, even suggesting that I stay with her for a while if things got too overwhelming at home. I thanked her but declined. This was my mess, and I needed to face it head-on. That night, Darren called with his first update. "They're definitely in Cabo," he said. "I've got pictures of them at the resort. They're not exactly laying low. Your wife's been posting photos on Instagram like it's a damn honeymoon." I clenched my jaw, trying to suppress the wave of anger that threatened to overwhelm me. "Do you have any way of getting closer? Anything we can use?" "I'm working on it," Darren said. "But trust me, they're not as untouchable as they think they are." His words gave me a glimmer of hope, but I knew this was far from over. Elise and Greg might have had the upper hand for now, but I wasn't about to let them walk away unscathed. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder how it had come to this. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built together, it was all a lie. But if they thought they could break me, they were sorely mistaken. Because this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. Darren's update the night before had lit a fire in me. Elise and Greg might think they'd escaped to paradise, but they had no idea what was coming for them. My first move was to dig deeper into Elise's digital footprint. I started combing through her social media accounts, which she hadn't blocked me from yet, an oversight on her part. Sure enough, her Instagram stories painted a picture of their lavish getaway. There were photos of poolside cocktails, stunning beach sunsets, and a particularly infuriating picture of the two of them clinking glasses with the caption, "To new beginnings." My stomach churned with anger. Every post was a slap in the face, a reminder of how little she cared about the destruction she'd left behind. But there was one photo that stood out, a shot of their resort room, complete with a visible room number on the door. It was a small mistake, but one I knew Darren could exploit. I forwarded the picture to Darren immediately. Within an hour, he called me back, his tone triumphant. "Got it. I've confirmed their location. They're staying in the penthouse suite of the Coral Breeze Resort. Fancy place." I exhaled, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. "What's the next step?" "Next step is up to you," Darren said. "I can dig up more dirt, maybe track some of their financials while they're there, or we could send them a little message." "A message?" I asked, intrigued. "Nothing illegal," he clarified quickly. "Just a little reminder that they're not as untouchable as they think." The idea was tempting, but I needed to tread carefully. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control of my life. I told Darren to gather more intel while I thought over my next move. Meanwhile, I reached out to Miranda again to update her on the situation. She was impressed with the progress Darren had made but cautioned me to remain patient. "We're building a case here, Elijah. The stronger our evidence, the harder it'll be for her to fight back in court." Her words were logical, but patience wasn't exactly my strong suit. Every minute Elise and Greg spent enjoying their stolen paradise felt like a personal attack. Still, I knew she was right. If I acted impulsively, I could jeopardize everything. That evening, as I sat alone in the house that now felt more like a shell, I got another message from an unknown number. Unknown, you're wasting your time. Just move on. We're happy. And there's nothing you can do about it. This time, I didn't hesitate. I replied, me. Enjoy it while you can. Paradise doesn't last forever. The message was petty. Sure. But it felt good to remind them I wasn't backing down. Greg, or whoever was on the other end of that number, didn't reply. The silence was almost as satisfying as an argument would have been. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Darren continued to feed me updates from Cabo, receipts, photos, even overheard conversations he managed to pick up through his network of local contacts. Elise and Greg weren't just enjoying their vacation. They were flaunting it. They had no idea that every move they made was being documented. But the real bombshell came when Darren uncovered something unexpected. Greg wasn't just Elise's lover. He was also involved in a string of shady business deals, some of which could land him in serious legal trouble if exposed. When Darren shared this with me, I felt a spark of hope. If we use this, he said, we can put some real pressure on him. It's leverage, plain and simple. I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally one step ahead. Elise and Greg thought they'd won, but they didn't realize the storm that was building right behind them. Darren's revelation about Greg's shady business dealings was the break I needed. It wasn't just about Elise anymore. This was bigger. Greg wasn't some random fling. He was a calculated risk she had taken, and now I had the means to make them both regret it. I told Darren to dig deeper into Greg's affairs. Meanwhile, Miranda helped me prepare a legal strategy that would tie Elise up in court for months. The goal wasn't just to recover my money. It was to show her that actions have consequences. As Darren worked, more details emerged. Greg had a history of conning people out of money, and some of his business partners were already chasing him down for unpaid debts. The irony of Elise running off with someone as morally bankrupt as Greg wasn't lost on me. But the most satisfying discovery came in the form of a photo Darren sent me. It was a candid shot of Elise and Greg at a resort event. Greg was laughing, holding a cocktail, while Elise looked tense, her smile forced. It was subtle, but I could tell cracks were forming in their paradise. I decided it was time to send a message, not to scare them, but to remind them that their perfect getaway wasn't so perfect after all. Darren suggested a small but effective move. That night, Elise's Instagram updated with a new post. It was a picture of her on the beach, captioned, "Living the dream, couldn't resist." Using a burner account, I left a single comment. Dreams have a way of turning into nightmares. Enjoy it while it lasts. The comment was gone within minutes, but I knew she'd seen it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Little did they know, the real nightmare was just beginning. Darren continued feeding me updates. Greg and Elise were no longer the carefree couple flaunting their new life online. Something had changed. They're keeping a low profile, Darren reported. No more poolside drinks, no more expensive dinners. Looks like they've realized something's wrong. That was exactly what I wanted. Instead of using anything illegal or dangerous, I had taken a different approach. I went fully legal. With Miranda's help, I reported Greg's financial activities to the proper authorities. His shady deals, unpaid debts, and fraudulent transactions were now being scrutinized by people who actually had the power to do something about it. Then came the biggest blow. One of the credit cards Elise had been using was still tied to our joint account, and thanks to the legal action Miranda had filed, the bank froze the card while they investigated the unauthorized withdrawals. Darren called me later that evening with an update. "You'll love this," he said. "Elise tried to pay for dinner tonight. Her card got declined. She freaked out, stormed out of the restaurant, and Greg didn't look happy." I let out a small laugh. Elise had thought she could drain my money and live happily ever after, but reality was setting in fast. But the best part? Greg wasn't just dealing with a frozen bank account. He was also now under financial investigation, thanks to his own questionable business moves. Their so-called paradise was crumbling, and I wasn't even done yet. By the next day, the paradise Elise and Greg had stolen for themselves was unraveling fast. Darren kept feeding me updates. Greg was growing paranoid. Elise was no longer posting online, and their dream vacation was turning into a desperate attempt to avoid being found. But I wasn't done yet. With Miranda's help, I had filed a legal motion to freeze any remaining assets tied to our joint accounts, including a credit card Elise had been using for the trip. It was a long shot, but if it worked, they'd be stranded with no access to money. Then, Darren sent me a message that made me grin. Darren, looks like your wife's card got declined at dinner. She stormed out, and Greg didn't look happy. Perfect. With Greg already being hunted by his old associates and now stuck with a woman who had just lost access to her stolen cash. The pressure was mounting. A few hours later, Elise made the first move. Elise, I need to talk to you. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Me, you made your bed. Enjoy lying in it. She called. I ignored it. She texted again. Please, I screwed up. I just need a chance to explain. I let her stew in her own mess. She had stolen from me, betrayed me, and run off with a con artist. Now, she was watching her new life crumble before her eyes. Darren's final report confirmed it all. Greg was furious. Their funds were drying up, and Elise was realizing she had thrown everything away for nothing. I didn't need revenge. I had already won. And as I watched the final pieces of their downfall fall into place, I smiled. Because for the first time in a long time I felt free.